Hi everyone, welcome to my channel and to my first video. My name is Michael and I am a teacher of English and Spanish. I also teach a little bit of Italian and French. This video today is going to be an introduction to the Spanish language. So today I'll talk a little bit about the Spanish language, give you some information about it, and then I'll also talk about the features that make it a little bit challenging, a little bit difficult for native English speakers, and I'll also talk about some of the reasons that it's not quite as difficult as you think as well. So, I'm going to start by giving you some background information about the Spanish language. And I'll start with why Spanish is a very good language to choose if you want to learn a new language or you've never learned another language before, apart from English. So why is Spanish a good choice if you want to learn a new language? Well, there are many reasons, but first of all, if you have a knowledge of Spanish, then you will be able to communicate with 477 million native Spanish speakers across 22 countries. Also, Spanish is one of the fastest growing languages in the world, so an additional 95 million people now use Spanish as a second language or as an additional language. So that means that you can communicate with a big proportion of the world's population in a language besides English. Also, Spanish-speaking people are really appreciative if you make the effort to try and learn and to try and use some of the Spanish language. If you go to a Spanish-speaking country, you will see firsthand how positively people react, because using the Spanish language in a Spanish-speaking country shows an appreciation for the people, their culture, and their country. And in return, they will help you in any way they can. So you will get great encouragement from native speakers in your language learning journey if you decide to learn Spanish. Another reason that Spanish is a great language to learn is because Spanish culture is so rich, so diverse, and so international. First of all, think of all the amazing Spanish music. There are flamenco legends like Paco de Lucia, world-renowned Spanish artists like Alejandro Sanz and Shakira, and current reggaeton stars like Daddy Yankee, all of whom record songs in Spanish. You could also watch amazing Spanish movies, dramatic movies and comedic movies by incredible Spanish and Latin American directors like Pedro Almodovar, who is really famous for his 80s and 90s films with Penelope Cruz. You could also watch movies by Alfonso Cuarón, who directs both in Spanish and in English, or movies by Guillermo del Toro, recent Oscar winner, and director of incredible Spanish fantasy movies like Pan's Labyrinth, for example. Also, some of the world's most famous and renowned literary works were originally written and published in Spanish. So, for example, you could read the 17th century masterpiece Don Quixote by Cervantes, or you could also read some of the best-selling works of the 20th century by Carlos Ruiz Zafón in their original language. So with all of this amazing culture, movies, music, TV, literature, and so on, you have access to so much amazing culture in the Spanish language. Now, if you're new to the Spanish language, you're probably wondering how easy or how difficult Spanish is to learn. Well, the truth is, there is no one objectively easy or difficult language to learn. Spanish, like every language, has some features that make it difficult for English speakers to learn and some features that make it slightly easier, because that's the truth about language learning. The difficulty of a language depends on many factors, so it's not easy to say that a language is easy or difficult to learn for everyone. So, let's start with some of the things that make it a bit more challenging. We'll get the bad news out of the way first. So I'll talk about some of the features that make Spanish challenging if you're a native English speaker. Number 1, nouns and gender. If you've learned another European language in the past, you'll probably be familiar with this idea. Many European languages divide their nouns into 2 different categories, sometimes 3 or more. But generally, most European languages divide their nouns into masculine and feminine. And that's what happens in Spanish too. And this isn't just related to people, this is also the same for inanimate objects as well. So, for example, the word wine in Spanish, vino, is masculine, el vino, and the word house is feminine, casa, la casa. So, you have to know which nouns are masculine and which nouns are feminine, because which category a noun belongs to can affect a lot of other words in the sentence. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. But this idea of dividing nouns into categories like masculine and feminine can be very difficult for native English speakers, because generally we don't have to do that. A table in English, for example, isn't masculine or feminine, it's just a table. So the idea of having nouns as different genders is something that can be difficult for native English speakers. Number 2, matching endings with the gender of a noun. Now, I was talking a few minutes ago about how important it is to know whether a noun in Spanish is masculine or feminine. And the reason for that is because Spanish changes the ending of other words in the sentence, like adjectives for example, to match the noun and whether it's masculine or feminine. So as an example, I'll use the word white. Okay, now the word white in Spanish is generally blanco. And we use that if we're talking about white wine, because as I said earlier, the word wine is masculine. So white wine in Spanish is vino blanco. But if you have a white house, now house, as you remember a few minutes ago, is feminine, casa. So if we have a house, then we have a white house, then we have to change the word white from blanco to blanca. Una casa blanca. And the reason this is difficult for native English speakers is because generally we don't need to worry about that. We use the same form of the word no matter what we're talking about. So white is always white, whether you're talking about a person, a table, a house, or any other object. We don't have to change these. So that can be difficult for native English speakers to get used to. Number 3. Verbs. Now this can be one of the most difficult aspects of the Spanish language, but it's also one of the most important to be able to do correctly, because verbs we use all of the time, even in English. But the reason that Spanish verbs are more difficult is because there are a lot more forms of the verbs. Let's use the verb go as an example. So in English, we only have 5 different variations, 5 different forms of the verb go. We have go, goes, going, gone, and went. That's it. That's all we have. However, the Spanish language has around 60 different forms of the verb go. Now, the reason for that is because in the Spanish language, they change the form of the verb go to say who is doing it. So, I go is a totally different form from you go in Spanish, for example. It also changes the form of the verb depending on when it's been done. So, they have different sets of endings for the present, the past, the future, and all of the other different tenses. So, that's why there's so much variation in the forms. Okay. However, there are some ways that, there are some rules that can help you with these endings, but it does take a lot of effort to memorise them and to use them as well. However, don't let these difficult aspects of the language put you off or discourage you from learning Spanish, because it's like everything else. The more you practice them, the easier they become. Okay, now that we've looked at some of the difficult things about the Spanish language, let's talk about some of the features of the Spanish language that can help us when we're learning it. So, number 1, shared vocabulary. Spanish is originated from Latin, and English also has a lot of Latin-based vocabulary. So because of that, English and Spanish have a lot of vocabulary in common. Sometimes the word is exactly the same in writing, and with a different pronunciation. Other times the word is very similar, and just with a slightly different form. But generally, if an English word and a Spanish word look very similar, then the chances are they have the same meaning. There are always exceptions to that rule, as there always is in languages, but generally, you can be certain that if you see a Spanish word that looks like an English word, it probably has the same meaning as its English counterpart. So, you can use the fact that English and Spanish have a lot of similar vocabulary to help you when it comes to memorising the meaning of words and using them in sentences. Number 2, spelling and pronunciation. One of the things that makes English difficult for people who are learning it is that very often the spelling and the pronunciation of a word don't always match. So, sometimes, for example, the two words can have a similar spelling but have completely different pronunciations. Think of read and read, or lead and led. Okay? Similar spellings but completely different pronunciations. In Spanish, you don't have that problem because every letter or every combination of letters has one pronunciation and it's always the same. So once you've learned how a Spanish letter or a combination of letters is pronounced, then it never changes. It's always exactly the same. So the letter I, for example, is always pronounced like E, as in the word feet. It's never pronounced like indigo or isosceles, for example. So whenever you see the letter I in Spanish, you always know exactly how it's to be pronounced. So that makes learning the spelling of a word or the pronunciation of a word very easy to learn in Spanish. Number 3, language patterns. So remember a few moments ago when I was talking about the fact that there are around 60 different forms of the verb go in Spanish, and that it can take a lot of work to learn all the different forms? That is true. However, there are patterns you can use to help you. Every language has its patterns. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but every language has its patterns, and Spanish is no exception. For example, if you see a verb ending in mos, M-O-S, then that indicates that we do something. And that's true for every verb and every tense. There's no exceptions to that. So you can use these patterns to help you learn about the structure and the grammar of a language. The plural of nouns is another good example of this, and let's use the English nouns mouse and house as an example. The plural of mouse is mice, but the plural of house isn't heis, it's houses. It's not very logical, is it? Because mouse and house are almost exactly the same word. So you would expect the plural forms to be the same as well. In Spanish, you don't have that problem. Almost every plural ends in S, and it's usually os, as, or es. There's no exceptions. Okay. So you can use these types of patterns to help you learn about the grammar, and you just have to find ways to identify them, which is what I will help with in these videos. So that's 3 reasons why Spanish isn't quite as challenging as you would expect it to be. So that's my introduction to the Spanish language. A couple of reasons why Spanish is a great choice if you want to learn a new language or learn a foreign language for the first time. Some things that make it a little bit challenging, but as I said, with practice you get used to those. And some reasons why Spanish isn't quite as difficult or as alien as it might seem. So I hope you've found this video informative and helpful, and I hope you'll like and subscribe to the channel so that you can learn more about the Spanish language and about language learning in general. So I hope to see you later on, and I hope to see you in one of my classes later in the year. Thanks. Bye.